So, we all know Demon's Souls Remake is a bit broken. Clipping into walls and objects to skip areas, going out of bounds to skip bosses entirely, the gold coin luck glitch for the one-shot blue blood sword, albeit patched by now. So you may be wondering how we could get even more broken than that. How about turning off the AI of bosses so they can't fight back while you wail on them? How about finding more boss skips? How about an infinite potential for skips through any fog wall or vaultable ledge? And what do you need to do this? 3 sticks and 3 strings. Today, I'm going to break down how a bow has caused the most dramatic change in Demon's Souls speedrun, and just glitch hunting in general since the first month of the game's release. Firstly, I want to talk about how the remake's general changes to Demon's Souls broke a lot of things. The original Demon's Souls did have a handful of glitches that actually were kept into the remake, but there weren't many. Some of them were patched as well. But in general, the foundation of Demon's Souls original was very strong without many glitches you can exploit to use in a speedrun. That meant that the original Demon's Souls was most likely the least glitch-heavy game in the series. And due to this being a fairly faithful remake and a lot of the foundation, from that foundation you can find a lot of glitches that you could not do in the original. However, the changes that they did make to the remake are usually the culprit of a lot of the glitches that work for the remake. So for instance, one of the reasons why Demon's Souls Remake has really fast load screens is that the whole world isn't entirely loaded once your character is back into the game. Obviously things like the floor will be fully loaded in, but we found out that a lot of objects and walls aren't fully loaded in yet. So that often means that if you walk into these walls and objects, you'll just phase through them, and then be loaded in a couple seconds later and you'll get boosted or maybe pushed out. The remake also changed a lot of the geometry for the areas, which allows us to do things like the Swamp of Sorrow drop, where we can drop down to the swamp from the very beginning of 5.2, or how the very original hard skip for 3.2 used to work, where you can just run around the edge of a wall that was covering the way to the man-eaters. And of course, there's items added altogether, such as the gold coin, that allowed the gold coin glitch to work. Pretty much none of these can be done in the original due to them being remake editions. So we have gone back and see if some of these worked, but they have not. The bow was one of the things that they got overhauled the most as far as the moveset and weapons are concerned, which is promoted a lot due to the haptic feedbacks and depth of triggers thing, where if the settings are turned on for it, you can actually feel the tension of the bowstring. The bow in general has a lot more control than the original. You can actually aim it fairly precisely without the aiming reticle. However, they might have given you too much control, because if you use the aiming reticle as you cross a fog gate, you can actually regain direction of the movement of your character. So that means if you were aiming your character backwards from the fog gate as you press X, and then press L1 to gain the aiming reticle, you'll actually walk backwards through the fog gate, and not have into the fog gate whatsoever. This can actually be done over vaultable walls as well, which has a lot less utility so far, but someone has actually found a very inconsistent skip for getting through most of the 1-3 area without running through it. And this will actually allow us to kind of go through the gate as well before the Fat Official closes it. Due to how inconsistent it is, we haven't really applied it to speedruns yet, but it could be if we find a more consistent way to do it. Back to fog walls, if you do this in a boss fog wall, one side effect that happens is that if you go backwards from a boss fog after going inside, you will actually notice that the enemies of the world will actually turn off their AI. So if you're being chased by enemies and you do this to get back away from the fog wall, you'll actually see that the enemies are kind of going backwards now to their other positions. Meaning that if you actually need to explore something that was very dangerous, for example, I like to think about the 5.2 level where it has the 4 big goblins with the stun of ephemeral eyes. If you ever want to get those, you can actually do this and go back to there, for instance. But of course, the main reason I even break this up is because the main application we've had thus far, for speedrunning especially, is that it allows us to sometimes skirt around the activation window of a boss, or whatever cutscene triggers them, and they won't actually turn on their AI, so they'll actually be able to take damage but not snap out of it, so to speak. So this tech was found by a user named NutNut on Discord and YouTube. He is a challenge runner and found this around March 2021. In the challenger community, they dubbed it bow breaching, which is a really nice name. But just to simplify it a little bit, in the speedrunning community started calling it bow tech. And the discovery of this bow tech and subsequent sharing to the speedrunning community actually made us pretty much split the leaderboard for Demon's Souls Remake in 2. So every single category now has a subcategory that divides in between unrestricted, or if you want to call it a true 80%, and a no boat tech 80%, for instance, which is just all the run before this tech was found. Besides glitches, of course, being that it is a glitch, very clearly. The reason this works is because we have noticed that some boss fights have one of three things. They either have a boss fog activation, which means that they have a line in the map that if you cross that line, the boss's AI will activate. In some cases, the cutscene acts as that activation, which can either mean that they won't be in the arena whatsoever if it's not activated, or that their AI won't turn on if that's not activated. Or three, which is the most rare, I believe, that I've seen from the bosses we know so far, is that despite whether you go through the fog wall or maybe wrong warp behind them or something, they will always be activated. They'll always react to you being in the room or due to being attacked. Some examples of the first instance with activation lines are Tower Knight, Old King Alant, and Flame Lurker. Some examples of the cutscene trigger are Leechmonger, Fool's Idol, and Storm King. And some of the ones that activate just via being in the room or tagging them are Vanguard, Old Monk, and Dirty Colossus. All these bosses I mentioned are a mix of being able to cheese or not be able to cheese due to how they specifically spawn. You can bypass Leechmonger's cutscene line, but for instance, Storm King isn't loaded in at all and you can't hurt it unless you trigger that cutscene. So as you can see, a lot of the bosses will activate differently, and that means that the bosses we can turn off the AI for varies depending on their situation. One thing I do want to make clear as well is that sometimes the cutscene line for a boss is longer than the activation line. So there are situations where we can actually go around one but not the other, which means that in some situations we may need to trigger the cutscene for one of the bosses and then quit out and retry the boat tech to just go around the activation line. Usually the cutscene activation will be one and the same, but again, if you already watched the cutscene for, say, Tower Knight, you won't have to rewatch it again and you can actually go past it. So that's one of the prime examples too. In the speedruns, usually what we do is trigger the cutscene, quit out, and then redo the boat tech as soon as we know that the cutscene trigger is gone. In this case, the activation trigger is shorter or less wide, and we can actually bypass it. For the speedrun, not all of the AF freeze has been useful. For instance, Flame Lurker in the current 80% speedrun, we actually do require to hit the cutscene of Flame Lurker and then quit out and do the boat tech again, which means that it does lose you a little bit of time. And in the current speedrun, we do dispatch Flame Lurker exceedingly fast with a homing soul arrow, so in this instance it's not very useful. But if you were to do a melee run where you need to dispatch him with like a dagger and stick of white stuff as you usually do in, say, the original Demon Souls, this is definitely very useful. On the flip side, there is a Man-Eater's cheese, but that one is actually incredibly slow, usually needing to use range to kill the first one, and only the first one too. So depending on situation, it may not be too useful. I want to say the biggest thing that was changed due to this for the 80% speedrun is that there was actually a skip found by NutNut and then expanded further by Experiment333 that allows us to skip Adjudicator, but the bit that was expanded was that you can actually use this skip to extend it all the way down to Old Hero. So you can actually use this to get all the way down to Old Hero, kind of in the way that you do with the Armored Spider skip, where you die in a theoretical 4-3, which would be the Archstone for Old Hero, and it spawns you inside the boss room. Unfortunately, the way that Old Hero works, he doesn't spawn unless you trigger a cutscene that's inside the boss room, not the fog gate. So you can bypass Old Hero as of right now, but it is a very, very hefty skip, and I will be making a video on it very soon, I hope. This alone has brought down the record to 34-39 by yours truly, when we were having a hard time reaching a 35, for instance. But that is by no means a perfect record either, so I do believe a 33 at the very least should be possible, possibly in 32, but that's a little bit more tough to achieve. So it has had a massive impact on the speedrun, primarily due to the skip. A lot of the freezes aren't actually that useful for the magic run, but here's a theoretical situation which it would actually be even more helpful, I believe. So a dupe has not been found for the remake yet. I still grieve about that every day. But if a dupe is found, I do believe that melee runs would once again be the fastest run due to you being able to get a fully upgraded bow for Storm King, and that you wouldn't have to get the Drag Bone Smasher and just upgrade your Battle Axe if you start Hunter, like in the original speedruns. And in those said melee runs, the biggest obstacle in the early run was Flame Lurker, so we could just freeze him and dispatch of him really easily, and then we can forego going to Freeze H Rake for the spells, even though the skip we have currently makes that really fast as well. And then freezing a lot of the harder bosses of the run, like King Allant, that were a nightmare in the original Demon Souls. At the very least, they'll be a lot closer, the magic versus melee routes, which would be very exciting because that would at least mean that the melee is finally more competitive. Some of the categories do already use melee, like the Force Quake category and Soul Level 1. The Soul Level 1 unrestricted are already getting close to the sub 40 time as well with the bow tech. So this could be a small resurgence of the melee run for the Demon Souls remake, which I know a lot of people would appreciate. So in conclusion, yes, the skip is very busted. There's something extra filthy about turning off the AI of a boss as opposed to skipping them altogether. But that is why we made a division in categories, in case anyone didn't want to do that. So yes, this bow tech is another of the many glitches in Demon Souls that really breaks the game further. And just like a lot of the other ones, it's actually very easy to perform. Some of the AI freezes are a little bit more difficult, or more precise at the very least. But even those seems to be fairly consistent once you get a feel for it and how to use references around you. Having the aiming reticle be a little bit of reference itself is really handy as well. And due to the fact that you can use these on any vaultable ledge and any fog wall, not even just the boss ones, just the ones you cross through the overworld. The only downside of those is that you will have those disappear after you cross them. But just due to that, this tech has near infinite potential to really break the game even further than we have now. Currently, what we're looking for the most in the speedrun is a way to get all the way to Storm King, bypassing Old Hero altogether. And one thing that would also save a little bit of time as well is maybe find a way to get to the second Bliss of the Dragon God before the first one, which is not something everyone's looking for, just something I realized we could theoretically do from some experience I did with force quitting and testing what works with Dragon God. If you'd like to learn how to do a lot of these AI freezes, this is actually a dual release video. I released another video alongside this one, which I will link now, which will teach you how to do a lot of these freezes. And if you'd like to subscribe to me, hi, I'm Berto. I do Demon Souls content almost exclusively on this channel. So if you enjoy this game and still like to see people talk about it, do make sure to hit that button. Alright, that'll be all. See you guys around. Hope you enjoyed the video. Bye bye.